What's up, everybody? So as you can tell, I'm still Trey, but I do have different hair. I decided it was time to cut it off, and you know, this is my new look. But anyways, back to the focus of today, or tonight.
The focus.
Tonight we're going to be measuring the bearing clearances for both the main bearings and the rod bearings. And as you can see right here, we have everything necessary. I still need to go grab the rod bearings, but because I didn't put those in yet. But everything regarding the main bearing, so this is the girdle. This is what's going to be holding the crank in place. All of the main bearings here are in place. They're dry, and they have to be dry for what we're doing. And then the other main bearings are in the block. And right here, you know, they're pretty self-explanatory when it comes to installing the bearings. You just have to make sure they're flush, you know, on both sides. Make sure everything's clean when you first initially put them in, because any debris underneath could cause a bearing to actually spin. So you don't want any debris underneath, because you want to minimize the possibility of a bearing spinning at all, because that's just a bad situation. So I installed the main studs as well. These are all ARP main studs. And then the bearings themselves are King Racing bearings for both rod bearings and main bearings. And yeah, I assembled all of the pistons and rods off camera. You can look up multiple techniques of how to actually install the rods to the pistons. These little circlips here were such a pain. My thumbs, especially the one that I was pushing, they're using the most force on them with, it's literally raw. So if you have the proper tool to actually, you know, press them in place and get them in, that'd be ideal. But you know, I didn't have those tools, so I just kind of had to manhandle them in. So those are done. They're all oiled up. Everything's good there, and they had movement and everything like that, and everything's smooth. I still need to place the rings onto the pistons. I'll show you guys that. But our main focus right now is getting the bearing clearances, which we're going to be using plastigauge, which right here, I got some plastigauge. So I'll show you the technique of how to use plastigauge, but for right now, everything's ready for the block. I'm going to focus right now on getting the crank, these little the journals, or just the crank journals. I'm going to work on getting these cleaned up. That way when we put it in, everything's, you know, because I've had it in storage for a while, so, you know, there's a little bit of debris on it, and I just want to make sure it's perfectly clean before I place it into the block and clamp everything down to measure the bearing clearance. So yeah, I'm going to clean this, and then after I clean that, then we'll be ready to set it in place the plastigauge, and then clamp down the girdle onto the block. So yeah. So I'd like to mention that I did have the block hot tanked. I had the crank checked, block checked too for, you know, any faults or anything like that. I did not have the crank micro polish, just because the machinist said it wasn't really necessary. And I've also talked to another guy who built his, and he said he didn't really need to. This only has 25,000 miles on it, so I don't really see a need to have it micro polished. But yeah, so one big thing about building engines is cleanliness. You literally cannot over clean. The cleaner the engine, the happier the engine. So if you're doing this, you know, one of the biggest concerns should be cleanliness. Yeah, we don't have, you know, the cleanest shop, you know, or an engine room dedicated to just strictly building engines, where we don't have to worry about things getting dirty or dusty. But you know, we're doing as much as we can right now to kind of make up for that. So yeah, so I'm gonna work on getting this into the block, and yeah, it's the first time it's been in the block since we took it out. Boom. And what you do not want to do right now is rotate it, considering the fact that there's no loop at all. The bearings are completely dry, which is the way you want it when you're doing plastigauge, trying to measure your bearing clearances. If we didn't have this, we would be using dial bore gauges, micrometers, you know, measuring each journal, and then the bore of each actual channel, or the bore for where the crank would be going. So we don't have access to those tools, so plastic gauge is our only option. I've seen it to be very accurate and very, you know, useful for what we're going to be trying to do here. So yeah, let's get the plastic gauge in place and then slap the girdle on. So when it comes to the plastic gauge, what we're looking for is 0.02 of an inch of clearance, and this is what we're going to be working with. This is basically just wax. It's a small little, you know, line of wax, and there's different clearance, I guess, tolerances that you can buy with the plastic gauge, and these ones are within the specification that we're going for. So the lowest it goes, this is millimeters, my mistake. Here's the inches. The lowest it goes is 1/1000th of an inch, and then it goes 15 thousandths, 2 thousandths, up to 3 thousandths. So we're basically going to be comparing what the wax looks like after we clamp the girdle on. So we cut a small section of this, put it in the journal, clamp it down, take it off, and then we compare the thickness of the wax after we clamped everything down to this. And if it's within the specifications, we're looking for 0.02 of an inch. If it's, you know, within that specification, then we're good to put the assembly lube and put it all together and then go on to the rod bearings. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this here and just cut that little piece, and then I'll probably just use this as reference for the rest of them, because that is going to be the length of all of the main bearing journals. So I'm going to cut a bunch of these, put them in place, and then we'll work on setting the girdle on there. Alrighty, so we got plastic gauge in all 5 of the journals here. It's kind of hard to see, but they're right in the center of the journal. I don't know if you can get a glimpse of it. I got one of them. But all 5 of them have plastic gauge in them. So what I'm going to do now is place the girdle in place here. And what that's going to do is it's going to clamp down on the plastic gauge and flatten it after we get everything torqued down. So I'm going to get all of the nuts and washers for the main studs and then start clamping them down. So prior to installing the washers and nuts, they are ARP washers and nuts, you're going to want to use the supplied lube, and you want to generously apply it to the washers and the nuts themselves. So for the nuts, I just put the lube inside where the threads are, so that way when we're tightening them down, it'll have even application to the actual stud. And then the washers, you just, you know, try to coat them that way. The lubrication does its job while it's clamping down, and it doesn't tear up the actual girdle or anything that it's fastening. Alright, so now we're at the point where we can actually clamp everything down, and this is not the final clamping phase. This is just so we can get the bearing clearance measurement. And when you're doing this, you're going to want to start from the middle and then work your way out evenly. So, you know, you go boom, 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 just so you can disperse that clamping force equally outwards. And what we're going to be doing is going in increments of 20, and we're going up to 60 foot-pounds. So you go 20, 40, and then 60. We're starting on 20, and then we'll move up from there. So here we go.
One thing to be noted though, when you're using a torque wrench, make sure that, I mean, this one's nice because it has the little lighting system right here, so you can tell how close to the torque.
And it vibrates too. And it'll show you when you're creeping up to the actual measurement, the actual torque spec too. It'll show you, and the lights will go from orange to green.
Exactly, but with torque specs, you want to make sure that you're not hitting that click or that beep on the start of a turn. You want to get it at the end of a turn, otherwise you're going to get an inaccurate torque spec.
You want it to be continuous. You don't want to, like, you know, stop and then go for the. It's just, you just have to be smooth with it. Make sure you're like he said, just continue until, you know, just continue moving until you hit that click. So now we're gonna go from here to here. Alright, so got all of them down to 60 foot-pounds. Now we're gonna work on getting them all loose. That way we can check the plastic gauge and see what our bearing clearances are. That didn't work as anticipated, but it does give us a ballpark. So, as you can see, the wax kinda, you know, it didn't work as I initially planned. And there's not too much really to go by on any of the journals here. This is probably the best one, and maybe this one here. But for the most part, they all look even. All right, so I went and measured the plastic gauge on the bearings for the girdle, and I measured it on the crank as well. And we don't have any measurements under 15 thousandths. They're sitting around 16 to 17 thousandths. So the way I tell it with that is you take the actual plastic gauge wrap, I guess, the way it comes in, and then there's the measurements here. And then you compare the thickness of the plastic gauge while it's squished to these little sections here. So I'm gonna place it in here. There's an example for this one here. As you can see, it's a little bit thinner. Yeah, this is the 2 thousandths mark right here, and it's wider. So it's somewhere in between that 15 thousandths to 2 thousandths. So that's why I was thinking it could be between, you know, 17 to 16 to 18, within that range. So it's within the specifications that I'm satisfied with. So we're just going to continue with the install. Take the crank out, put in the assembly lube where the bearings are. That way we can do exactly what we just did, but instead we'll, you know, rotate the crank, make sure everything's moving smoothly, and then move on to the rods and pistons. So I already went ahead and I cleaned the surface of the bearings of all the wax. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the crank. And after that, we apply the assembly lube. I'll show you guys that. We apply it on these bearings and then on the main bearings as well. And then we're good to set the crank back in. And then that'll be the final resting place for the crank. Final resting place. Sick. Enough of the girdle. I'm gonna clean this real quick.
Cleanliness is next to godliness.
Alright, so as you can see, we have the crank installed. It's got the assembly lube on it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to leave 2 of the cylinders at bottom dead center. And this is bottom dead because the engine's upside down. So we're going to leave these 2 right here so that when we install the pistons and the rods, we're going to be able to measure the bearing clearances for those. Because when we have them in, they're going to be dry and you can't rotate it. So I want to have it ready for us to measure those clearances. But I know I said earlier that we're going to be incorporating the bearing clearances for the rods with the bearing clearances for the main bearings in one video. But I thought it would be just better to show you guys, you know, how to install the crank and then move on to installing the pistons and rods and then incorporate the bearing measurement with that. So this is just going to be crankshaft install and bearing clearance measurement for the crank, the main bearings. And then the next video is going to be piston installation as well as the rings and everything like that. And we're going to be measuring the bearing clearances for the rods at that point. So I just like to thank everybody for watching the video. If you enjoy, you know, watching us build this engine and, you know, doing all this, I personally think it's a really cool experience because this is the first engine that I've actually built. And I'm really excited to see it, you know, running and in the car and, you know, actually producing good power and reliable power. So if you like what we do, make sure to subscribe. Yeah, fingers crossed. Like I said, this is the first engine that I've ever built, so fingers crossed that it's gonna, I mean, I'm doing everything I can to, you know, make it reliable and the best it can be. But if you like what we do and you kind of dig us as people, you can subscribe to us on our Instagram. We'll put it like right here or somewhere. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please subscribe. Hit the like button and notification bell if you want to know whenever we post new videos and everything. But yeah, we'll see you guys when we finally install the pistons and get that much closer to having this baby built and ready to go. Thanks, guys.